There's a number of anachronisms in the Book of Mormon. One of the ones that has been very popular is the idea of horses. So the Book of Mormon says horses, and yet we don't see horses, pre-Columbus horses in America. So one thought of this is that when the people populated America from Jerusalem, maybe they didn't see horses immediately, but there are records, and the people saw, oh, four-legged animal that can carry things, and they called it a horse, even though it might have been like an alpaca or a llama or something. That would make sense. I could see myself doing the same thing, find some description. It is interesting to note that I don't think there's any place anywhere where anyone is ever riding on a horse. Everyone's always running here and running there, and all the descriptions of their battles and all the everything, which would kind of make sense. Both mistakes would make sense. That they would use the word horse to describe some animal that is, roughly the similar size and can carry things, especially if the people hadn't seen horses before, they'd only read about them. And it would also make sense that therefore, people wouldn't be riding horses ever in any battles. I think an artist depicted Helaman riding on a horse once, but this is never described. It always just talks about them, on foot, always in these battles. That probably seems like the most, likely explanation to me. Assuming that the Book of Mormon is true, which I do, but for non-scientific reasons, for spiritual reasons, I assume it's true. But I did find this interesting. I just did a Chat GPT, kind of asked the question about horses, pre-Columbus horses, and this is what I had to say. While we don't see horse bones lying around in abundance today, that doesn't mean horses didn't exist in ancient America. Only that they were wiped out long ago, and time, weather, and nature erased most of their remains. Yes, just like the bison, prehistoric horses could have left few visible remains because they died out so long ago, and their skeletons were mostly destroyed by natural processes. But unlike bison, we know from fossil evidence that horses evolved in North America, spread to Asia, and were only reintroduced to the Americas by the Europeans in the 1500s. So maybe there were horses on this continent many, many hundreds of years ago, like, what would it be, 800 years ago or something? Close to 1,000 years ago. But they were wiped out, and we just don't have fossilized remains of them, similar to the bison, which we don't find a lot of bison skeletons around, even though there used to be millions of them all over the place. We know that the horses used to be here because we have found some remains, but most of the remains we found were from a really long time ago, and they were in tar pits and this sort of thing. So it's possible that our scientific information that we make some conclusions based on what we find, and we just haven't found some, doesn't mean that they didn't exist. It just means that we haven't found them during that time period. I still think it more likely that the horses were something like llamas or alpacas, since nobody's ever recorded to ride on one, and you can't ride on alpacas and llamas. But they are used to carry things. So here's a little deep dive too, using AI to help me find things. The Book of Mormon mentions horses a few times, but it never clearly describes anyone riding a horse or using a horse to pull a chariot in the way we understand it from the old world or modern contexts. However, there are a few verses that mention horses and chariots in the same sentence, which some interpret as possibly implying that horses were used to pull chariots, though the text never directly says so. Here is every relevant passage where horses and chariots are mentioned, with emphasis on any implication of riding or draft use. So first we got 1 Nephi 18:25. There is no mention of riding or using horses for labor. And we got Enos 1:21 mentions Nephites raising horses, but no mention of riding or using them for work. This is the most common passage here, the most cited passage when discussing the possibility of horses pulling chariots in the Book of Mormon. However, the text only says that Ammon prepared the horses and chariots, not that he hitched them together, rode them, or used them in transportation. The wording suggests a ceremonial or royal preparation, but it's unclear what the actual use of these chariots had. So here again in 3 Nephi 3:22, again horses are mentioned among livestock, no mention of them being ridden or used as beasts of burden. There's never any mention of horses in regards to war or combat, and there's a lot of war chapters in the Book of Mormon. In summary, nowhere does the Book of Mormon ever explicitly describe anyone riding a horse. Nowhere does it explicitly describe horses pulling chariots, and the references are brief and vague, possibly ceremonial or symbolic, and not clearly tied to the kind of horse-drawn transportation known in the Old World. If horses existed as we understand them today, they definitely would be used. They'd be used in war, they'd be used for transportation, they'd be used to pull things all the time, and yet it never describes that. Ever, in any place, never in war, never in transportation, never for any sort of labor or anything being done, except for this one reference to a king and a chariot being used. This is something that a lot of people may not know. Mesoamerica, pre-Columbian America, is no draft animals, as we discussed, so all heavy transport was done by humans. Wheeled toys from the Olmec and Maya show carts with axles and wheels, often with animal or human figurines, but there is no evidence of full-scale carts or chariots pulled by people. So what this is saying here is that we actually have a cart-like structure pulled by humans, and that the Olmecs and the Mayas actually have these illustrations and wheeled toys that are pulled with animals or with humans. Now, why would they have illustrations, the Olmecs and the Mayas? At the time period, this is exactly the time of the Book of Mormon. Why would the Olmecs and the Mayas have toys and figurines and things depicting chariots being pulled by animals, some kind of animal, horse-like animal, we don't know, or by people if this didn't exist? So we know this actually did exist. This is something that there's depictions of it with the Olmecs and the Mayas, which is overlapping the timeline of the Book of Mormon. So we also know that these cultures used alpacas and llamas, these sorts of things, to carry loads. And so it does say horses and chariots, and we have evidence of people pulling wheeled carts like chariots, which would likely be used to pull the king and maybe his family. And then also mentions these horses, which also would be, or alpacas or llamas, whatever you want to call them, that would be used to carry things like maybe the food or the tents or other things that might be useful for a journey. So often we make assumptions. We make assumptions that, it mentions horses, it mentions chariots. Therefore, there must have been horses and chariots as we understand them today. But if they did exist as we understand them today, then we would see them used as they are today, or in the 1800s. But we never see them used in that way, ever in the Book of Mormon, which means that we really need to question our assumptions. If horses existed in America as we see them today, they would be, or in the 1800s, we would see them used in that way, and it's never the case. And then there's just one reference where it talks about them both together, and clearly both those things would be used together for some sort of royal trip. Alpacas and llamas existed. They're very useful for carrying things that can carry up to like 75 pounds. That'd be very hard for a person to carry that much stuff over a long journey. And we explicitly have evidence of Mayans and the Olmecs, both Book of Mormon time periods, with wheeled toys, showing carts with axles and wheels, often with animal or human figurines. So we know this existed. So to say that this is an anachronism is just false. So to say the horse thing is an anachronism is, as we know now historically, inaccurate. Unless you make assumptions, but those assumptions don't actually line up with the Book of Mormon, because they're not used like that in the Book of Mormon. Anyways, interesting discussion. Do I know the answers? Of course I don't, but this is some interesting historical things that AI has pulled up.